Within a day of assuming office for his second term in January 2025, President Donald Trump imposed a sweeping 25% tariff on all Canadian imports, sending shockwaves through North American markets. The decision highlighted the deep economic ties between the two nations, particularly in the energy sector. For decades, states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota had depended on Canadian hydropower to stabilize their grids, relying on cross-border transmission to ensure a steady energy supply during peak demand. This largely unnoticed interdependence suddenly came under intense scrutiny as Trump's tariffs threatened to upend the balance. The timing of the announcement signaled its strategic significance. Canada, long seen as a cooperative and stable trade partner, now faced an urgent reassessment of its role as the U.S.'s primary energy supplier. Behind closed doors, Ottawa's policymakers began crafting contingency plans, including the potential restriction of electricity exports, a move that could leave millions of Americans in the dark and disrupt critical infrastructure across the border. The conflict's origins date back to late 2024, during a private gathering at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. At a dinner attended by world leaders and corporate executives, Trump, fresh off his re-election, turned to Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and remarked, "Justin, Canada would do well as America's 51st state." Delivered with his trademark mix of humor and bravado, the comment initially seemed like an offhand quip. Trudeau responded with a polite smile, expecting the moment to pass unnoticed. But Trump didn't let it go. As dessert was served, he expanded on the idea, arguing that Canadians would benefit from lower taxes, cheaper prescription drugs, and improved healthcare under U.S. governance. The room filled with uneasy laughter, uncertain whether the remark was a joke, a provocation, or the prelude to a serious proposal. The ambiguity left Trudeau's team quietly strategizing how to respond. On December 10, 2024, Trump reignited controversy with a Truth Social post that took direct aim at Canadian sovereignty. Instead of addressing Trudeau as Prime Minister, he provocatively referred to him as Governor Justin Trudeau of the great state of Canada. The wording, implying Canada was a U.S. territory rather than an independent nation, triggered an immediate backlash. Social media exploded with outrage, spawning memes and hashtags like #NotOurGovernor, while Canadian news outlets condemned the remark as both insulting and reckless. In the U.S., media outlets speculated on Trump's intent. Was this the prelude to a serious annexation push? A strategic play in upcoming trade negotiations? Or simply another attention-seeking stunt? The Canadian government chose not to respond officially, refusing to escalate the situation. Behind closed doors, however, Trudeau's advisors grew increasingly concerned about Trump's rhetoric and its potential implications. Tensions escalated further on December 18 when Trump, without evidence, claimed that a majority of Canadians favored closer integration with the U.S. The statement, amplified by conservative media, was quickly debunked. A Nanos research poll conducted days later found that 89% of Canadians rejected the notion of statehood, with many dismissing Trump's claim as delusional. By early January 2025, the rhetorical sparring escalated into concrete economic action. Trump formally announced a sweeping 25% tariff on all Canadian imports, justifying it as a response to Canada's lax border security and unfair trade practices. The tariff struck key sectors, including lumber, $7 billion, steel, $4.3 billion, and agricultural products like dairy and pork, $6.5 billion. U.S. officials argued that Canada had reaped disproportionate benefits from the USMCA and that the tariffs were necessary to rebalance the trade relationship. Canada responded swiftly. On January 7, Trudeau addressed the nation in a televised press conference, his tone more forceful than usual. "Let me be unequivocal," he declared. "There isn't a snowball's chance in hell that Canada will ever become part of the United States. Our sovereignty is not for sale, not today, not ever." The defiant statement, laced with a folksy idiom, resonated deeply with Canadians, solidifying his stance as non-negotiable. Unwilling to relent, Trump escalated the rhetoric on December 25, using a Truth Social post to reframe integration as a win-win for Canadians, promising lower taxes, expanded business opportunities, and world-class military protection. But to the Canadian public, the offer reeked of coercion. By February 1, Trump formalized the tariffs through an executive order, set to take effect on February 4. Canada's response was swift and strategic. On February 2, Ottawa imposed retaliatory tariffs on $155 billion worth of U.S. goods, precisely targeting industries central to Republican strongholds, Kentucky bourbon, Texas aerospace parts, and Florida citrus. The message was clear: Canada would not bow to economic pressure. At the same time, Canadian provinces began flexing their economic leverage. Ontario Premier Doug Ford hinted at cutting electricity exports to Minnesota, Michigan, and New York, a serious threat, given that 1.5 million Americans depended on Ontario's grid. Meanwhile, Alberta capitalized on its energy dominance. With the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, completed in May 2024, allowing Canada to pivot oil exports toward Asia, Alberta's Environment Minister, Rebecca Schultz, embarked on a trade mission to Japan, securing agreements to supply liquefied natural gas, LNG, to major firms like JERA. The trade war accelerated Canada's long-standing push for economic diversification. Agreements like the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, and the Canada-EU Trade Agreement, CETA, became pillars of this strategy. By February 2025, Canadian exporters had begun shifting supply chains: lumber to Japan, beef to Germany, and potash to India, reducing dependence on the U.S. market. At home, a Buy Canadian movement gained traction. Social media campaigns encouraged consumers to support domestic businesses, while provincial governments took action to strengthen internal trade. In a notable move, Quebec and Alberta signed an agreement to ease restrictions on dairy and beef trade between their provinces, a symbolic step toward greater economic self-sufficiency. Behind closed doors, Trudeau's cabinet grew increasingly wary of Trump's true intentions. In a confidential briefing, Trudeau remarked, "This isn't just about tariffs. It's about control over our energy, our water, and our critical minerals." The data backed his concerns. Oil: Canada supplied 97% of U.S. oil imports, with 4.6 million barrels flowing south daily through pipelines like Keystone. Natural gas: 7.9 billion cubic feet per day powered American homes and industries. Minerals: Canada provided 40% of the U.S.'s nickel and 75% of its aluminum, both essential for defense and manufacturing. By late February, Ottawa was weighing the possibility of restricting nickel and rare earth mineral exports, a move that could cripple U.S. electric vehicle and aerospace production. A temporary 30-day tariff truce in mid-February offered a brief diplomatic pause, but trust had already eroded. Canada's strategy now rested on two key pillars: diversification, reducing its reliance on the U.S., and deterrence, leveraging its control over critical resources. Meanwhile, Trump's rhetoric of natural destiny backfired, alienating even traditional allies. Republican senators from border states, fearing blackouts and factory shutdowns, quietly pushed for de-escalation. The crisis exposed a stark truth: the once stable U.S.-Canada relationship had devolved into a high-stakes economic standoff. For Canada, the battle was existential, defending its sovereignty against a neighbor increasingly willing to assert dominance. For the U.S., it was a wake-up call: interdependence cuts both ways. As Trudeau noted in a closed-door meeting, "We may be the mouse sleeping next to the elephant, but even a mouse knows how to bite."